The cowboy said, "You need a man like me," and the Apache woman froze. The sun hung low over the wide open fields of the ranch, painting everything in soft golden light. The smell of fresh earth, grass, and horses filled the air. The ranch was quiet, except for the distant clatter of hooves and the occasional crowing of a rooster. Life here moved slowly, but it had its own rhythm.
One that the cowboy knew well.
He had spent most of his life on this land, learning how to ride, how to care for the animals, and how to keep the ranch running. To him, this life was simple, honest, and strong. But it was also a life shaped by assumptions, by the way things had always been done, and by a world where he rarely met people who challenged him. The cowboy, whose name was Luke, was a tall man with broad shoulders, suntanned skin, and hands calloused from years of hard work. His boots were dusty, his hat slightly worn, and his eyes held a confident spark. The kind of spark that came from knowing who you were and what you could do. He liked his routine best. He liked the smell of the horses, the feel of the reins in his hands, and the quiet strength of the land. But today, something unusual was about to disturb that routine. At the far edge of the ranch, near the small creek that ran along the property line, a woman was working. She moved gracefully and with purpose, her dark hair tied back, her clothing practical yet showing the elegance of someone who carried herself with pride. Her name was Ayanna, and she was Apache. She had grown up with stories of her ancestors, learning the importance of strength, independence, and respect for the land. She had come to this area for business and community work, helping her people and sharing knowledge where she could. To her, the ranch was interesting, but it was also a place that reminded her of the differences between her world and the one Luke had grown up in. Their first encounter was almost accidental. Luke had been checking the fence lines, making sure the animals were safe. His horse trotted alongside him, ears twitching at every sound. He noticed Ayanna near the creek, bending down to check something by the water. He stopped for a moment, watching her. She looked up, noticing him, and for a second, their eyes met. But it was a simple glance, but it carried something unspoken. Curiosity, surprise, and a tiny spark of connection.
Luke dismounted and walked over.
"Hello there," he said casually, tipping his hat. "I didn't expect to see anyone out here today." Ayanna straightened, her expression calm but careful. "I'm just checking the water for the plants. It's been dry lately," she said, her voice steady and respectful. Luke nodded, trying to match her calm tone. "I see." "You're good with that stuff?" he asked, glancing at her hands, which were covered in dirt and small scratches from her work. "I know my way around," she replied with a small smile. "The land has taught me a lot." There was a brief silence. Luke, feeling a mix of curiosity and pride in his own knowledge of the land, wanted to say something to impress her, to show that he too was capable and strong. Breath. He had a habit of speaking before thinking, especially when he felt a spark of interest in someone new.
And so he said it.
"You need a man like me," he said, smiling confidently. The words hung in the air, heavy and awkward. Ayanna froze. Not because she was scared, but because the comment caught her completely off guard. Best. It was bold, presumptive, and somehow carried a weight that made her pause. She looked at him carefully, trying to decide how to respond. Brace. Her mind raced, not with anger, but with surprise and a silent question. Who does he think he is? Luke noticed her pause and felt a small pang of unease. Bet he had meant it as a joke, as a confident statement, but now he realized it might have sounded rude. He shifted slightly, unsure of how to continue. I didn't mean to offend, he added quickly, though he wasn't entirely sure how.
Ayana's eyes softened just a little, but she remained still.
Bit. She could sense that Luke wasn't entirely aware of what he had done. He had spoken from a place of confidence, but without understanding the strength and independence that she carried with her. She decided not to respond immediately. Sometimes, the best answer was to wait and observe, to let the person realize their own words. Psst. For a few moments, the air between them was filled with quiet tension. The wind rustled through the trees. The water in the creek gurgled softly, and a few birds flew overhead. But Luke scratched the back of his neck, feeling a bit embarrassed but also intrigued. He had met many people in his life, but few had this kind of presence, calm, strong, and completely unshaken by his usual confidence.
Finally, Ayana spoke, her voice firm but polite.
Confidence is good, she said, but assuming someone needs you, that's different. Luke blinked, trying to absorb her words.
They were not angry, but they carried meaning. She wasn't rejecting him outright, but she was setting a boundary. Begged. She was letting him know that respect was required, and that admiration or interest could not replace understanding. He nodded slowly, feeling the truth in her words. I see, he said quietly. I didn't think about it that way. Ayana gave a small nod, acknowledging his effort to understand. Then, without another word, she returned to her work by the creek. Luke watched her for a moment longer, feeling a strange mix of admiration and curiosity.
Bend.
He had never met anyone like her. Her calm strength, her independence, and the quiet authority she carried were unlike anything he was used to.
As he walked back to his horse, Luke realized that this encounter had shaken something inside him. It wasn't just about the comment he had made. It was about seeing someone who could stand firm in her own world, who did not bend or sway for him or anyone else. It made him think about his own life, his assumptions, and the way he had always viewed relationships and respect. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Luke sat on the porch of his small ranch house. He stared at the horizon, lost in thought. He replayed the conversation over and over, analyzing every word, every glance. He realized that meeting Ayana had stirred something in him. Curiosity, yes, but also a desire to understand, to learn, and perhaps to grow. Meanwhile, Ayana returned home, her own mind occupied. She thought about the cowboy, about his confidence and his words. She didn't feel anger, but she did feel cautious.
She had seen many people over the years, some kind, some presumptuous, some strong, some weak.
Luke was interesting because he had strength, yes, but also a willingness, perhaps, to listen if he chose to.
That made him different from most. Over the next few days, they encountered each other again, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes through shared responsibilities in the community or local markets. Breath. Each time, the tension from their first meeting lingered. But it was changing. The awkwardness began to give way to understanding. Respect. Luke observed her closely, noticing her patience, her intelligence, and the quiet way she carried herself. Ayana, in turn, began to see glimpses of sincerity in him, moments when he truly listened, when he put aside his assumptions and spoke with thoughtfulness. Yet neither of them rushed. Both knew that understanding and trust could not be forced. They moved slowly, each encounter building a subtle bridge between two worlds that had only just begun to touch. And though their connection was new and fragile, it carried the potential for something profound, a meeting of minds, hearts, and respect that neither had expected. By the end of that week, Luke found himself thinking about Ayana even when he was alone on the ranch. He thought about the way she moved, the sound of her voice, the calm authority in her eyes. And more than anything, he thought about his own behavior. about the words he had spoken without thought, and about the lessons he was beginning to learn. Ayanna, too, reflected on their encounters. She considered the strength it took to stand firm in a world that often expected her to bend, and the courage it required to see good in someone who had stumbled at first. She was cautious, yes, but also intrigued. Something about Luke was different, perhaps because he was beginning to change, or perhaps because he reminded her that people could surprise you when you least expected it. As the week drew to a close, the ranch settled into its usual rhythm. Horses grazed quietly in the fields. The wind rustled through the trees, and the creek murmured its gentle song. Life continued, as it always did. But for Luke and Ayanna, something had shifted. Their worlds, once separate, had collided in a small but meaningful way. And though neither of them knew exactly what would come next, both felt the quiet pull of possibility, a possibility born from respect, curiosity, and the first sparks of understanding between two very different lives. And so, Part 1 closes with a moment of reflection and quiet tension. Both the cowboy and the Apache woman have been introduced to one another's strength, independence, and character. Neither dominates the other, and neither fully understands the journey ahead, but the seed has been planted. A seed that will grow as they continue to meet, observe, and learn from one another. After their first awkward encounter by the creek, the days passed slowly on the ranch. Luke tried to get back into his usual routine, checking fences, feeding horses, and repairing barns. But he found his thoughts drifting to Ayanna more often than he liked to admit. Her presence lingered in his mind, not as a simple attraction, but as a puzzle he wanted to understand. He had met many people in his life, but few had made him stop and think about himself, his assumptions, or the way he treated others. Ayanna, too, felt the lingering echo of their first meeting. She respected the cowboy's work and his confidence, but she also remembered the bold words he had spoken, words that carried assumptions she wasn't willing to accept. She wondered about him. Could he change? Could he see people beyond his own perspective? She didn't answer these questions yet. She preferred observation over speculation, action over idle curiosity. But secretly, she found herself interested in the possibility that Luke might surprise her. One morning, the ranch was quiet, except for the soft sound of hooves against the dirt. Luke was rounding up the cattle for their morning feeding when he saw Ayanna again. She was near the barn, checking on a small garden she had started for the community. Her hands were busy in the soil, her posture steady, calm, and confident. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to approach, but his curiosity won. Morning, Luke called out, tipping his hat. Ayanna looked up, her expression neutral but polite. Good morning, she replied. She didn't stop working, but her eyes flickered toward him. Luke walked closer, trying to find the right words. He wanted to show that he respected her space, but he also wanted to engage. I was thinking about the creek the other day, he said slowly. You seem to know your way around water and plants. I could use some tips on keeping my land healthy. Her hands paused for a moment, and she looked at him with a slight surprise.
Most people in the area didn't care much about plants or the land beyond the basics. They expected work and cattle, but she noticed something in Luke. A genuine curiosity, a willingness to learn.
She decided to respond, Healthy land isn't just about watering it, she said. You have to observe it, understand it, and pay attention to the small signs. Plants and soil tell you what they need if you take the time to notice. Luke listened carefully, nodding. I've worked this ranch all my life, but I don't always notice the small things, he admitted. I think I could learn from you. Ayana raised an eyebrow but didn't speak immediately. Psst. She wanted to test whether he was sincere or just saying polite words. Learning takes patience, she finally said. And humility.
Are you willing to do that? Luke hesitated for a moment. He realized that humility was not something he had practiced often. He was used to being confident, sometimes even arrogant, but now he felt a small shift inside him.
I want to, he said quietly. I don't always know everything. But
I want to understand better. Her lips curved into a small smile, just enough to show she acknowledged his honesty. Then we can start slowly, she said. I can show you a few things about the soil and how to read it, but you have to listen carefully and follow instructions. Not just hear words, but really understand them. Luke nodded eagerly. He felt a mix of excitement and nervousness, but it was strange for him to be in a position of learning from someone else, especially someone whose strength and independence made him feel both challenged and intrigued. He followed her to the small garden, listening to her explanations about soil texture, plant roots, and natural indicators of health. As she spoke, Luke noticed how patient she was. She didn't rush, she didn't belittle him for mistakes, and she didn't assume she knew what he needed. Her calm authority was different from anything he had experienced. Most people he met on the ranch either followed him or ignored him, but Ayana treated him as an equal, expecting effort and respect in return. For hours, they worked together, examining the soil, planting seeds, and discussing natural methods of care. Luke found himself genuinely learning. Every small detail she explained made sense, and he felt a growing respect for her knowledge and patience. At the same time, he became aware of his own assumptions and how often he had underestimated others. During a short break, Luke leaned against the fence, watching Ayana work. He noticed the way she moved, confident, steady, and entirely comfortable in her own skin.
You're good at this,
he said honestly. Ayana glanced at him without stopping her work.
It's not about being good, she said. It's about paying attention, understanding the land, and respecting it.
Burrs. That's something you can do too if you try.
Luke thought about her words carefully. They weren't a compliment meant to flatter him. They were a challenge.
She wasn't trying to impress him. She was encouraging him to grow. For the first time in a long while, Luke realized that respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned, and it began with listening and learning. The days passed, and Luke continued to spend time with Ayana. Their interactions grew natural and comfortable. They shared small talks about ranch life, the local community, and the traditions of her people. Ayana told stories of her ancestors, of the lessons she had learned from them, and Luke listened with genuine interest. He realized that there was a depth to her life experience that he had never encountered before. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Luke and Ayana sat on the fence overlooking the fields. The air was cool and quiet, filled with the sounds of the evening, crickets, distant cattle calls, and the whispering wind. Luke felt a sense of peace he rarely experienced alone, and even more so with her nearby.
You've taught me a lot, he admitted quietly.
Not just about the land, but about myself. I didn't realize how much I assumed about people, about life, about what it means to respect someone. Ayana looked at him, her expression calm and thoughtful. Understanding comes slowly, she said. It's not about how much you know. It's about how much you are willing to see and listen. Luke nodded. He felt a sense of humility that was new to him, and with it, a growing admiration for her. He also felt something else, a quiet pull toward her, a recognition that this connection was unusual, meaningful, and rare. As the days turned into weeks, their bond strengthened. Luke found himself seeking her advice, not just about the land but about life and choices. He realized that her perspective was valuable not because it flattered him, but because it challenged him to think differently. Ayana, in turn, observed his growth. She noticed his willingness to listen, his respect for boundaries, and the quiet sincerity that began to replace his initial boldness. Yet despite this growing respect and connection, neither of them rushed. They both understood that trust, understanding, and genuine respect could not be forced. They allowed the relationship to develop naturally, learning from one another without expectation. Each encounter deepened their understanding, and each shared moment created subtle threads of connection that neither had anticipated. One afternoon, a small challenge arose on the ranch. A fence had broken near the creek, threatening to let a few cattle wander off. Luke and Ayana worked together to repair it, using their combined knowledge and effort. Luke handled the heavy lifting, while Ayana guided him with careful instructions and observations. The task required cooperation, patience, and communication. They finished it successfully, and both felt a quiet sense of accomplishment.
Not bad,
Luke said with a small grin. Ayana laughed softly, shaking her head.
You're learning, she said, but there's always more to understand. Her words carried warmth and challenge at the same time.
Luke realized that he enjoyed these moments. The work, the learning, and the subtle exchanges that required attention, respect, and effort. He also realized that his admiration for her had grown beyond curiosity. It was now rooted in respect, understanding, and recognition of her strength.
By the end of Part 2, both Luke and Ayana had experienced growth.
Luke had learned humility, patience, and the importance of listening, while Ayana had observed the potential for genuine change in someone she had initially found presumptuous. Their bond, though still new, had deepened into something meaningful, a connection built on respect, understanding, and mutual curiosity. The first tension caused by Luke's bold statement had softened. What remained was not awkwardness or discomfort, but a quiet, shared acknowledgement. Both had learned something valuable from the other, and both were open to what might come next. The stage was set for further growth, deeper understanding, and the possibility of trust and friendship, perhaps even more, in the days to come. The ranch had begun to feel different to Luke. It wasn't just the routine of feeding the horses or mending fences anymore. It was the way he now saw everything through a sharper, more attentive lens. Every morning he noticed small details he had never paid attention to before. The way the sun touched the grass, how the soil shifted after rain, the patterns of the birds flying overhead. And he noticed something else too. The subtle ways in which Ayana had changed his perspective. She had taught him patience and observation, but more importantly, she had shown him that respect was earned, not given. Luke reflected on his past interactions with people and realized how often he had assumed he knew better or acted without considering someone else's strength and intelligence. Ayana had forced him to reconsider not just how he treated her, but how he viewed the world. It was another warm morning when Luke saw her working near the orchard, gently tending to young trees. The early sunlight illuminated her dark hair, and she moved with the quiet authority of someone completely at home in her own skin. He felt a familiar tug in his chest, a mixture of admiration and curiosity. And this time, he walked over without hesitation.
Morning, Ayana, he greeted, trying to sound casual but failing slightly because his voice carried more warmth than usual.
She looked up, offering him a polite smile. "Morning, Luke," she replied. Her eyes held that calm strength he had come to admire. She had noticed his growing attentiveness, his quiet willingness to learn, and she found it interesting and encouraging. I wanted to ask you about these trees, Luke said, pointing to the saplings. They don't seem to be growing as fast as the others. Am I missing something?
Ayana wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. Growth isn't always visible at first, she explained.
Sometimes it's happening beneath the surface. Roots are strengthening, preparing for the future.
You just have to care for them carefully and give them time. Luke listened closely, appreciating not only her knowledge but the way she communicated it.
She wasn't just giving instructions. She was teaching him a way of seeing, a way of understanding life's rhythms. It made him feel more connected to the land, and more importantly, it made him feel more connected to the people around him, especially her. As they worked together, Luke felt the dynamic between them shifting. He wasn't just learning from her. He was learning alongside her. They began sharing small observations about life, about challenges, and about values.
Luke discovered that her strength wasn't loud or demanding. It was quiet, firm, and unwavering.
She had faced struggles in her life, endured expectations from the world, and yet carried herself with grace and integrity. One afternoon, after a long day of work, they took a break under the shade of a large oak tree. Luke leaned against the trunk, feeling the warmth of the sun on his back, and watched her as she rested beside him. For a moment, the silence was comfortable, filled only with the sounds of nature around them. "You've changed a lot since we first met," Ayana said softly, breaking the quiet. Luke looked at her, surprised. "Me? How?" he asked. "Fast. You've started to notice things," she replied, her eyes calm and thoughtful. "You listen more, you think more, and you respect more. It's not something many people learn so quickly."
Luke felt a surge of pride mixed with humility. He realized she wasn't praising him lightly. She was acknowledging real change.
Desk, and it made him want to continue improving, not for her, but for himself. "I've learned from you," he admitted, quietly. Not just about the land, but about how to see people differently, how to listen, how to respect. Ayana nodded, a small smile forming on her lips.
Good. That's how growth begins.
She said, "You start by noticing, then understanding, then acting with care. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen if you keep trying."
Luke thought about his earlier arrogance, the words he had spoken when he first met her. "You need a man like me!" He shivered slightly at the memory, realizing how presumptuous he had been. But now he felt grateful for that moment, too, because it had sparked a journey of reflection and growth he would never have experienced otherwise.
Over the following weeks, their bond deepened further.
Luke began seeking her advice on not only ranch work, but also decisions about managing the property and interacting with neighbors. He noticed that she had a rare ability to balance strength with empathy, to be firm yet approachable, insightful yet patient. Every conversation was a lesson, and he treasured them more than he had expected. One evening, a small crisis struck. A sudden rainstorm had caused part of the fence to collapse, and several cattle had wandered close to the creek. Luke and Ayana rushed to fix the problem, working together under the heavy clouds. Luke carried the wooden posts while Ayana guided the placement and tied the wires with careful precision. The work was challenging, but their cooperation was seamless. After the storm passed, they stood together, looking at the repaired fence and the cattle safely grazing beyond. Luke felt a deep satisfaction not just in the work done, but in how naturally they had worked together. "We make a good team," he said, offering her a tired but genuine smile. Ayana smiled back. "Yes, we do," she said. Her tone carried warmth but no flirtation. It was respect, recognition, and acknowledgement of effort. Luke realized that this was just as important as any personal compliment.
As the weeks turned into months, Luke noticed subtle changes in himself.
He became more patient with his workers, more attentive to the animals, and more mindful in his interactions. He had started to see life in a broader, richer way, a world where understanding and respect mattered more than assumptions and ego. Ayana's influence was quiet but powerful, shaping not only his actions, but his thoughts and values. Ayana, meanwhile, observed him closely. She noticed how his confidence was no longer brash or overbearing, but tempered with thoughtfulness and care. She appreciated his willingness to listen, to learn, and to respect boundaries. Though she remained cautious and independent, she also recognized that Luke's growth was genuine, and that made her feel a subtle sense of trust, something she rarely extended so quickly. But their connection was now based on mutual respect, trust, and shared experience. They spent long hours together, sometimes working, sometimes talking, sometimes simply observing the land. Luke admired her knowledge and her calm strength, and Ayana admired his willingness to change and to genuinely learn. Neither felt rushed, neither forced the other, and yet their bond grew stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, while repairing a barn roof, Luke slipped and nearly fell.
Ayana caught him quickly, steadying him with her hands.
The moment was brief, but Luke felt a surge of gratitude and awareness. He realized how much he had come to depend on her insight, not just for guidance, but for perspective, for grounding, for understanding.
"Ah, you're steady," he said once his balance was secured. Ayana raised an eyebrow, smiling slightly.
"I've learned from experience," she replied. "And sometimes you need to trust others as much as they trust you." They weren't just about the barn. They were about life. About relationships. About trust and growth. He realized that he was no longer the same man who had first spoken boldly and presumptuously. He was learning, changing, and understanding in ways he had never expected. By the end of Part 3, both Luke and Ayana had grown significantly. Luke had learned humility, patience, and respect, and Ayana had learned that trust could be earned and that people could change when given the right guidance and example. Their connection, though still cautious and carefully measured, had developed into a meaningful bond. The foundation of trust, mutual respect, and understanding was firmly in place. Both knew that challenges would continue to arise, but they also knew they could face them together, learning from one another and growing as individuals. The awkward tension of their first meeting had transformed into something much more profound, a recognition of each other's strength, insight, and value. The story was no longer just about the land or the ranch or even the people around them. It was about two individuals from different worlds, learning how to see, respect, and support one another. The stage was now set for the final part of their journey, where they would face challenges that would test the bond they had built, forcing them to rely on trust, understanding, and the lessons they had learned together. The days on the ranch had settled into a comfortable rhythm, but the bond between Luke and Ayana had grown stronger with each passing week. What had started as curiosity and awkward tension had transformed into mutual respect, trust, and understanding. They had learned from each other, and both had changed in ways that were noticeable not only to themselves but also to the few people who worked around them. One bright morning, Luke rode out to check the northern fence line. The air was crisp, the scent of grass and wildflowers carried on the breeze, and the land stretched out in endless shades of green and gold. He had grown more observant in recent weeks, noticing details he had once ignored: weak fence posts, patches of dry soil, and even the subtle behavior of the cattle. He was no longer rushing through tasks. Instead, he approached each one with patience and attention.
As he neared the orchard, he saw Ayana tending to the young trees.
Her dark hair glimmered in the sunlight, and her hands moved confidently over the branches. She looked up and waved, her calm eyes meeting his. Luke felt a familiar warmth, a quiet pull of admiration and trust. "Good morning," he called out as he dismounted. "Morning," she replied, her voice steady and welcoming. They spent the morning together, inspecting the orchard and discussing how to nurture the trees for a better harvest. Luke had become more skilled, but he still relied on Ayana's guidance and knowledge. Their conversations flowed easily now, no awkward pauses, no presumptions, only genuine communication and cooperation. By midday, a sudden commotion arose. A young foal had escaped its pen and run toward the creek. Luke and Ayana rushed to guide it back, but the foal was frightened and stubborn, darting toward deeper water. Without hesitation, Luke ran after it, but the uneven ground made him stumble. Before he could fall, Ayana reached out and grabbed his arm, steadying him. "You have to stay calm," she said firmly. "Best. The foal senses fear. Speak softly and move slowly." Luke took a deep breath, following her instructions. Together they slowly guided the foal back to safety. The experience, though tense, revealed how much they had learned to trust and rely on one another.
It wasn't just about physical help. It was about understanding, communication, and patience.
Afterward, they sat on the creek bank, breathing heavily but smiling.
Luke looked at Ayana, his admiration more profound than ever.
"I don't think I could have done that without you," he admitted. Ayana shook her head with a gentle smile. "You could have, but it's easier when we work together," she said. "Beck, that's the lesson. Life is easier when people respect and support each other." Luke nodded thoughtfully. Her words resonated deeply. He had learned that strength alone wasn't enough. Patience, understanding, and cooperation mattered just as much. And he had learned that these qualities were not signs of weakness, but of character and wisdom. The afternoon passed quietly. They returned to the ranch house, tending to small tasks and observing the animals. Luke noticed how naturally their teamwork had developed. Tasks that once seemed difficult were now completed efficiently, with both of them contributing their strengths. More importantly, their connection was no longer based on tension or curiosity. It had matured into genuine partnership and trust. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow across the fields, Luke and Ayana sat on the porch, looking over the ranch. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the sounds of evening. Crickets, the occasional bark of a dog, and the rustle of wind through the trees.
"You've taught me more than I realized," Luke said quietly.
But not just about the land, but about people, respect, and patience. About listening and learning.
About seeing the value in someone without assumptions. Ayana looked at him, her calm eyes reflecting the fading light.
"And you've shown me that people can grow, change, and learn if they are willing," she said. "Not everyone can do that, but you have."
It matters. Luke felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of completion that went beyond accomplishment or recognition. He realized that meeting Ayana had changed him in a way that nothing else could. He had become more patient, more understanding, and more aware of the world around him. And he had come to appreciate the strength of others without needing to overshadow it with his own.
In the days that followed, Luke and Ayana continued their work and shared small experiences that strengthened their connection. They repaired fences, planted trees, cared for animals, and even hosted a small community gathering.
Every task became an opportunity for cooperation and learning, and every interaction deepened their mutual respect.
One evening, a neighbor stopped by with concerns about the cattle.
Luke and Ayana addressed the issue together, calmly and efficiently. Luke spoke to the neighbor with consideration, incorporating Ayana's advice, and the problem was resolved without conflict. It was a small victory, but it demonstrated how much both of them had grown. Individually and as a team.
Ayana observed Luke's approach and felt a quiet pride.
He was no longer the impulsive, confident man who had made assumptions about her at their first meeting. He had become thoughtful, attentive, and respectful, someone who could understand and learn from another person's perspective. And Luke observed Ayana with admiration, recognizing the patience, wisdom, and quiet strength that had guided him through his own transformation. As the weeks turned into months, their bond continued to grow. They shared stories of their pasts, experiences that shaped them, and lessons learned from their families and communities. Luke spoke of his life on the ranch, the hardships, and the lessons he had learned. Ayana shared her heritage, the stories of her ancestors, and the values she held dear. These conversations went beyond casual talk. They became exchanges of wisdom, mutual understanding, and shared respect. One afternoon, as they sat under the shade of a large tree, Luke reflected on the journey they had taken together. "I never thought a simple meeting by the creek would lead to this," he said, smiling. "I've learned so much from you. I'm a different man because of it." Ayana nodded, her expression calm but warm. "Bess, and I've seen your growth. You've shown me that change is possible if someone is willing to learn and listen. That matters more than words ever could." The two sat in silence for a moment, enjoying the peace of the afternoon, the quiet rhythm of the ranch, and the simple satisfaction of knowing that they had influenced each other in meaningful ways. As the story of their connection drew to its natural conclusion, it was clear that both had grown in ways that would stay with them forever. Luke had become more thoughtful, patient, and respectful, understanding that strength alone was not enough.
Ayana had witnessed the power of change, seeing that people could grow and learn when guided by patience and mutual respect.
Their bond, rooted in experience, trust, and understanding, had become an example of how relationships could flourish when built on respect rather than assumptions. It was a partnership that transcended differences of culture, background, and initial impressions, and it was a bond that neither of them would forget. One evening, as the sun set in vibrant shades of red and orange, Luke and Ayana stood together, looking out over the fields they had worked to care for. The air was warm, the wind soft, and the ranch quiet. For a moment, they simply enjoyed the peace they had created together, a life of shared effort, understanding, and mutual respect.
"You know," Luke said softly, "I never expected to learn so much from someone I barely knew."
I thought I had it all figured out. I was wrong. Ayana smiled gently. "Learning never ends," she replied. "And sometimes the lessons we need come from the people we least expect. You've learned well."
Luke felt a quiet sense of gratitude.
He had learned patience, humility, and respect. He had learned to see others as equals, to appreciate their strengths, and to listen without assumptions. And most of all, he had learned the value of trust, earned, given, and reciprocated. Ayana, too, felt a sense of fulfillment. She had witnessed growth and change in someone who had started with confidence and assumptions but had become thoughtful and aware. She had taught, guided, and observed, and she had seen that real change was possible when people were willing to listen, learn, and respect. As the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Luke and Ayana stood side by side, knowing that the connection they had formed would endure. Not because of romance or excitement, but because it was grounded in respect, understanding, and the shared experiences that had shaped them. They had become partners in life's lessons, teachers and students to each other, and friends who had earned trust and admiration through effort and patience. The ranch continued its steady rhythm, the animals grazing peacefully, the fields growing strong, and the wind carrying the scent of grass and soil. But for Luke and Ayana, Life had changed in ways far beyond the physical work of the land. They had discovered the strength of mutual respect, the power of learning, and the quiet but lasting impact of true understanding. And in that quiet golden light of evening, as the ranch settled into calm and the world seemed vast and full of possibility, both Luke and Ayana knew that their lives had been forever enriched by this unexpected connection.
What had started with awkward words and hesitation had grown into a bond of trust, respect, and shared growth. A bond that would guide them, inspire them, and remain with them always.